Hiya, how's it going? You're listening to Born Optimistic, our second show. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to everyone who tuned in last week for Moby and everyone who shared and talked about the show on Twitter at Born Optimistic, Facebook, Born Optimistic Show. Friends, family, acquaintances, strangers, thanks to all of you. Without you, we would be nowhere. Moby was talking on last week's programme about how he felt like an outsider all the time and how everyone feels like an outsider a lot. Tim Booth from James is no different, as you'll hear in this interview now in a moment. James have been going for nearly 4 decades, and I first discovered them courtesy of the Ganley's record collection in Dunlow in Ballinasloe, live album called One Hand Clapping, amazing record. All these years later, I'm in Los Angeles filming for Dare 360, and I managed to cop an invite into Tim Booth's home. I was really surprised when I discovered you were living in America. I had no idea. And a friend of mine said it to me, and I mean, not that I'm stalking you and all your movements, but I'm wondering what brought you to America?
California, going particularly to an area called Big Sur, and particularly a ranch called Esalen Institute, which was a 120 acre ranch overlooking the cliff tops, mountains coming down to sea, where you might look out in the sea and see sperm whales breaching with babies, the second largest sea otter colony in the world, cracking abalone shells on their back, floating in the water. And this place was magical. The Native Americans said it was too magical. They said you shouldn't live there. It was too sacred ground. And I'd never been on land like it. It's as if time would stop and everything would become very dreamlike when you entered that place. I had a friend who developed a whole system of movement from that ranch. And she rang me and said, "Tim, I see you coming to Esalen. You should come to Esalen. I don't know why, but you meant to come." And so the next year she was teaching there, and I flew in. And I walked in, and the first day I met my wife. And about 10 years later, my son was conceived there. And so it became this kind of magnet for us that we wanted to live near there. We knew many of the people who lived there. They lived rough communities. You can't really build there. It's a national park. It's amongst redwoods. You know, there's no running water in some of their houses, no electricity. They'd be dragging water up from rivers, and you know, there's coyotes and mountain lion and rattlesnakes, and it was like, I want to live in a place like this that fills you in nature, in the danger of nature, in real nature, not that kind of sanitized nature because we've killed off all the predators, but a nature where all aspects of life and death coexist.
And how different is Topanga from where you were born and what you were born into, where you grew up?
Oh, God.
Because I've no idea, like, as I was explaining to you earlier, like, I've been a fan of yours since the late 80s, been to your gigs, got your albums, but I know so little about you, and not that I feel entitled to, but, you know, I don't actually know where you were born or what that was like or anything. Maybe it's weird that I expect to know those things if I'm into an artist and into a band. So I'm just curious about what kind of world were you born into? What was your upbringing like?
I mean, many of the questions that you want to ask me are questions I purposely avoided, and James have avoided. It was James, the whole idea of calling it James was that it wasn't based on the singer, what had been called Tim. And I've kept a lot of this quiet. Depends what areas we go into.
I remember the first time I saw you live, 1991, in the National Stadium, and there was such a buzz and anticipation. You know, we listened to your music for years, but there's this thing you do when you play live. There's a cumulative process, and the gig builds and builds and builds in terms of passion and intensity and energy. And and your movement is a lot of the focus point for that. But we all knew as friends that Tim Booth, he's into stuff. We never knew what it was, but we had this idea based on whatever scraps of information we'd had about you, or being in the same room as you at gigs. You know, there was a sense that, you know, Tim's into stuff. He's connected to stuff. And to this day, all these years later, it's I have a vague sense. Like, for example, I, for some reason, assume you don't eat meat.
No, I eat meat ravenously. For 12 years, I was a vegetarian, 4 of which vegan. And the energy of what I do in performance meant I got skinnier and skinnier and less well. And there was a point on an American tour where I just found myself eating salmon and I ate salmon every day for about a year and a half. Whatever it was in salmon, my body needed. So that broke after about 12 years.
I'm a pescatarian, so I haven't eaten meat in 20 years. So, you know, salmon is kind of on my list. I'm well fed. I'm, you know, well filled out. And,
I'm still skinny as hell. I mean, there's a story, and I'll tell you the story, which helps me in a way, because the things I came to, I came to because I had to. I didn't necessarily come to by some kind of philosophical choice. I did that too, but it was also a matter of survival. So we'll go back to your first question, which is where I was brought up very middle class in a town called Clifford in Yorkshire, near Wetherby. I was the middle class kid in the village, of a very working class village, and my friends were the Hope twins, and I think that is not without irony, that if you called someone Hopes in a Chekhov play, you know what that meant. And they were hope for me. My family was very staid, middle class. We didn't even have a record player. We had no culture, as far as I remember. Although my sister bought a record player and played me Leonard Cohen when I was 8, and it was one of the first pieces of music I really listened to. But I was the posh kid in the village, and all the kids wanted to see if the posh kid could fight. So I got bullied quite a lot. And my friends, the Hope twins, were a year and a half older than me, so they were always bigger than me and stronger than me. They didn't bully me, but they didn't know how to defend me in that situation. And I was bullied probably up until the age of 11, and thought of myself as quite a coward, because I didn't really win a fight. Until one day I got cornered by 3 people, and a group formed and pushed the 3 people they were supporting one of the guys who was quite popular, and they kind of pushed him into me, and I stuck out my fist and knocked his front teeth out. Complete accident. And everybody went, ooh. And a week later I knocked someone else's teeth out.
Oh my God.
And my mother was confronted with a dental bill by another mother in a car park waiting at the school. And after that, people left me alone.
You were a tough kid, obviously.
Yeah, completely. A complete joke, of course. I knew it as a massive bluff. I just happened to put my fist out, and these idiots walked onto them. And I did then take up boxing, and again got in a fight with, in front of the school, with some poor other soul who was more frightened of me than I was of him. So for a while, the bullying stopped, and I was free to go my own way.
And did you feel like a complete outsider?
Complete outsider. I was in a middle class milieu of the late 60s, early 70s, you knew something was going on in the world. My sister's oldest, I was the youngest. My sister was a Marxist communist, and and she would bring back dispatches from Sheffield, and you knew something exciting was going on for women, and particularly, and for races, and you knew there'd been a huge mistreatment of people sanctified by religions, male-based religions, mistreatment of minorities and of sexualities that weren't straight, and of women. And my sister fed me her Cosmopolitans of the time, which were actually quite radical magazines in the 60s. They weren't the Cosmopolitans of today.
What age were you reading Cosmopolitan?
She was sneaking them to me against my mother's wishes from the age of 14. And in there would be vivid descriptions on how to please a woman, and how to approach a clitoris, and did the G-spot exist, and why women should grow armpit hair. So I was introduced to feminism at a very young age. And as I say, Cosmopolitan was not the toe rag of fashion that it is now. It was trying to educate, and it was becoming a focal point. And for an impressionable 14-year-old, to read that, balanced with stealing his father's Mayfairs and Playboys, it was a confusing time for a 14-year-old. On one hand, to be, hiding in his bedroom, looking at pornographic, well, not what we'd call pornographic images nowadays, but naked women, and going, holy shit, this is what they look like, wow, and masturbating to those, and then reading about how to please a woman and how women had been subjugated for thousands of years.
And how did this cosmopolitan education transfer to the girls around you, in terms of your approach to them?
I think it confused the hell out of me. It meant that I approached women from quite a gentle perspective, rather than a testosterone grab 'em, as some of my school friends would do. It really made me feel guilty as a man, and aware of thousands of years of abuse. Thousands of years of abuse, and I cannot overstress that. I sat and watched Suffragette with my 12-year-old son the other day. You have to wait a minute. I've always felt this so deeply, and it's just outrageous, really, what man has been capable of. Tribal man, the way we are so frightened of the other sexuality, the other race, the other colour, and women in general. I had a revelation recently. A friend of mine came around pregnant, and I was so overjoyed and in awe of her. And I thought, I was so in awe of this woman is going to bring through a life into this world. And I thought, God, is this where all the fucking religions come from? That they looked at women and went, we can't do this. We are smaller than them. Well, let's create a religion where there's a male God, and we created the women, because how else can we live with these deities who are bringing life into this world, the real creators, the real gods who bring life into this world? Because if there's a God, it's a woman. It's like, take a look around, folks. We come through a woman, and we don't come through men. And so I really believe these religions were built by the insecurity of men looking at the awesome moment of giving birth.
And how do you see the sexual politics and gender politics evolving? You know, in terms of where it was when you were 14, where it is now, and where you think it'll be in a generation's time.
Well, your show is about positivity, and if you look at the last few hundred years, you can see there's been a shift, a general shift in human consciousness towards seeing the other, the alien other, whom we would normally have fought, as, oh, they're versions of me. And this starts with slavery, and it moves with women's right to vote, and it moves to gay people being allowed to marry, again, which is just such a ridiculous concept, that who had the right to stop them? But we've still had to go through that birthing, and to transgender rights coming, and it will lead forward into polyamory, into, why do we say we're meant to be two? Oh, it's another of these religious social ideas that have been imposed upon us for thousands of years, at risk of death, at risk of complete exile, at risk of the society turning around and completely rejecting you or stoning you. And today, obviously in half the world, where a woman expressing her sexuality means she is likely to be murdered, or to at least be totally exiled from all that she loves. And the WHO estimate that under 100 million women have been sexually castrated in the world. Just under 100 million. And that tells you everything.
But then I was really shocked when I picked up your new album, and the first track is called Bitch. Now, the difference between what I thought before I listened to the track and after I listened to the track was immense. And in Bitch, there's this amazing acclamation. I love my wife. I love my kids. And it's just hit me. Like, that's not the type of stuff you're used to hearing from a rock and roll band.
But still I bitch. You know, I love my sons, I love my wife, so why'd I bitch, 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 bitch? It's like, I think there's a part of us that always wants more. And, you know, even when you live you have a great family and a great life, you want more. And I think that's an inherent disease within us.
Well, it depends how you define more. Because if you want better, you're trying to make the world a better place. And that's, you know, and so for me, progress is the evolution of ideas and thoughts and inventions. And, I believe in trying to add to the pile of good stuff rather than the pile of rubbish stuff. But if you rest on your laurels, you're not trying to create better ways of doing things.
I love that. But there's a fine line between better and greed. And there's a fine line between accepting the world and therefore finding a contentment and being forever restless and wanting more. And definitely for me, I blur those edges and get lost sometimes and then find myself again. For me, I meet people who seem much more content in their lives than me. I look at you and I go, you look like one of those people. But I swing, and I do and I don't.
I preserve I share my optimism with the world, and I try and protect the world from my pessimism. You know, I try and internalize as much of the negative stuff as I can so I can share the more positive stuff. When I was a teenager, and I'll never forget, I was walking down the street and I had this glum expression on my face that wasn't how I felt, and my friends started slagging me, and I realised that how I felt on the outside wasn't reflecting how I felt on the inside. And I remember the moment I was like, from now on, I am going to do my best to pump out the positive side of how I feel rather than the negative. Why not?
And I think that's beautiful. There's a slight problem with being an artist in that I feel an obligation to be connected to some of the horrors of the world in order to allow that to be in my words, in order that to infiltrate, to be absorbed into what I'm writing about. Otherwise, I just write about a happy middle-class existence living in a national park with my wife and kids. And that isn't enough for most people. That isn't enough for me. I'm still writing to probably the young boy in me that is hungry to understand the contradictions in the world of the beauty and the beast, of watching those incredible Planet Earth David Attenborough movies and being in awe of those animals, and then watching some unspeakable cruelty as the animal that you've just rooted for is devoured by an eagle out of the blue and torn to pieces. And you're like going, okay. I mean, Joseph Campbell said the central paradox of life is that we have to kill in order to live. It was one of the, when I read that, that was one of the things that, philosophically enabled me to eat meat again. Because that is the central paradox of life. Something dies so we may live. All the studies of vegetables and plants are that they are sentient beings. They're alive too. I don't know if a redwood tree seems as alive to me as a bear. And I've sat with both of them in the Sequoia National Park, and they both seem alive. So I don't know if eating an animal is any higher a spiritual choice than eating a carrot. I really don't know. And I don't think anyone does. I had other reasons, by the way, for part of the story. I'll go back to the story. From about the age of 11, 12, I started turning yellow. And I was nicknamed Chinky at school because I was always yellow. And nobody cared to look at my health, which I was getting sicker and sicker every winter. And it turned out, which got diagnosed when I was 20, that I had a liver disease. And so for about 12 years through my adolescence, which is a tricky period in itself, I was jaundiced. I was sent to a British Victorian boarding school that was brutal. It was in the 70s, but it was really set in about 1930. The first year you were called New Scum by the other kids and by the teachers. And the second year you're called Scum. And I was sick all winter and yellow and called Chinky, which led to Guru Booth, weirdly enough, because obviously they associated the Chinese with some kind of guru. And because I asked questions about life that were strange questions about life. You know, I was fascinated by life. Fascinated by where the fuck do we come from? What the hell am I doing in this story? You know, how am I meant to survive this? No one had diagnosed it as illness, so I thought it was my psychology. I thought I was mad. Jaundice comes with a whole mental state of bitterness. You know, that if in the medieval times they said you had a jaundiced view of life in Chaucer, it meant that you were bitter. And I thought that was me. I thought, my God, I'm just such a sick person as a human being psychologically. Convinced that I would eventually get discovered and be in a mental hospital. I was convinced of that I would end up in a psychiatric hospital until I was about 28.
That sounds like a miserable adolescence.
Yes, but I didn't know any better. So, in a sense, it wasn't as bad as it sounds. It was something you learnt to manage internally. But yes, it was miserable. I actually look upon it in a really positive way, because most, people talk about, oh, your school days, best years of your life. And it's like, you want to bet? And for me, life has got better and better. And my health has got better and better. As I learnt about these things. It peaked around 21 when I actually stopped breathing in hospital and was revived, and they diagnosed it finally. I stopped breathing and I remember it, and it was so peaceful and beautiful. And then all the alarms went off, and this nurse came in and she brought me back, and I was pissed. I was not happy to be brought back. And that moment changed my life for a couple of things. One was that death seemed like a very beautiful thing, or getting close to death seemed like a very beautiful thing. And secondly, they diagnosed me as having, the doctor said, it's as if you've just had hepatitis B. There's nothing we can do about it. We don't have a name for it. And we're going to let you go, and there's nothing we can do. And I was like, okay, it's time to look into alternative medicine. And I was 21, and alternative medicine was ridiculed in those days. And I started looking at homeopathy, acupuncture, Chinese herbs, colonic irrigation. The wackier it was, the more I went and investigated it, and made huge headways in making me a healthier person. And was like, oh, these things work. I learned that the establishment didn't know its arse from its elbow. I learned that my life depended upon me throwing myself into a world that was ridiculed by the culture. It took me to meditation. It took me to all the things that you might call spiritual. I came to through necessity. I was a singer in a band by then, by about a year, in a world where everybody was taking loads of drugs. If I took loads of drugs, it was going to kill me. I could take drugs, but once, twice a year. Once I'd worked that out. Before I was taking drugs more as my generation was, socially. And it was making me sicker and sicker till the point where I ended up in hospital. And I couldn't walk upstairs, and so I had to learn discipline. I had to learn that, there is a benefit to this stuff, but my God, you have to be careful with it. It's a medicine, but it's a toxic medicine. And if it's approached in terms of a consumable, just another thing to consume, like chocolate, you're going to die. Or I'm going to die, certainly. But I watched other people go down. I watched people I loved end up in psychiatric hospitals through dope, simple marijuana. And so it taught me some strong lessons that have probably kept me alive to this day.
I'm curious about the questions you were asking as a 14-year-old or in your teens, and if you found answers for any of those.
Questions. There was a judge's son, Simon Pickering, and I remember he came round with a questionnaire, and the questionnaire was, who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you going? And I was probably 14. And it was like I'd been waiting for those questions for the whole of my life. I'd been in the middle class world where everything was about, in those days, how you looked, how you appeared. your manners. Were you a good boy? My mother was very controlling. I didn't choose any of my clothes until I was 16. So I was dressed up fancy, which got me into all kinds of trouble. I had no real say of my life. When you're sent to a boarding school, your hours are mapped up every single hour of the day. Church every day, then to school, then to lessons, then 2 hours of physical education, then homework period where you're locked in a room for 2 hours. It's like every hour is mapped out. And you learn to try and find your inner world within that regime, that is a regime that's trying to stop an inner world. Boarding schools were created to create generals, politicians, colonels for the empire. That was the history of boarding schools. And they were particularly tough. They were, no comforts, no central heating, the window left open at night so that if you had a glass of water by your bed, it froze over. The idea was that it would be the making of you, is the phrase. It would be the making of you. And it was the making of some kids, and it was the destroying of some kids. I watched kids die of anorexia. I watched a few people die at those schools. And so it was a very privileged upbringing. Literally, I because I know that that's a general view of boarding school. I believe they've changed. This was obviously all boys, and I believe they've changed. I still don't get the idea of having children and then sending them away for 3 months at a time.
What's the point in having them?
Why have you had a kid? And
this contrasts incredibly with the education that your children are having.
The stuff that gets taught in schools educationally can be taught in 2 years. It's bullshit. It's really what you want is a child to learn discrimination, how to feel comfortable about being themselves, how to be respected no matter how small they are, how to make their own decisions, how to understand this mad world that we live in from a young age. To me, those are what we send our child to. He goes at the moment to a nature school where they go hiking twice a week. And the kids learn, there's a study where I think the average child in America can recognize 200 logos of products. Our child can recognize 200 different plant species and flower species and bird species, and what plants medicinally they can do. Our child can make a fire from flint and learn how to make a shelter and camp out overnight and survive overnight. Our child is going to learn how to hunt and animals and to eat or forage and know which mushrooms they can eat and which mushrooms are going to give them a surprise.
If you look at when you started investigating the alternative world when you were sick and all that's changed now in terms of society's perception of things that were deemed wacko when you were 21, do you think about that, the passage from alternative to mainstream acceptance?
What I've witnessed is I started doing yoga at 18 and it was ridiculed. And I went out with the vicar's daughter and he wrote a piece in his parish magazine saying this was the work of the devil. Martial arts really came to the West, you've got to say, with Bruce Lee to a large degree. And meditation came to the West to a large degree with the Beatles and Hare Krishna. And certain things, if they had power, took root. If they didn't, they fall away. And I would say it's an evolutionary process, that these things that are effective take root. The things that don't fall away. And there's been, I would say, this whole growth I talked about of seeing the other as another of us, another of me, seeing that black man who's my slave as a human being, as another of me with the same rights as me. That was an evolutionary change of consciousness. And there is a general wave in that direction going on. You could tell me about lots of countries where that's not true, or where there's a huge resistance, mainly coming from organized religions, mainly coming from male-based organized religions. That cannot be overstated. And that's coming. We've just had a huge setback in the States with Donald Trump, where it looks like, oh God, so much is going to get reversed. It's a 1 step back, 2 steps forward process. You know, there are forces working to separate us from our humanity. You know, if there's one terrorist amongst 20,000 that get in, yeah, we're going to have to vet really carefully. But then if we don't let those other 10, 20,000 in, we're kind of committing a war crime. And we can't do that. That's not forward.
And how do you remain positive in the face of all of this?
I don't sometimes, because it's a really fine balance between educating yourself and reading the information of what's going on and being able to keep equilibrium and not become so depressed that you become dysfunctional. That there are actual practices, there are actual things you can do that will change your life. And the proof is in the doing of them.
And I love all those BBC4 music documentaries because people are honest after a time.
Yes.
And the music industry is all about keeping the artists away from their fans.
But the thing is, we did talk about this at the beginning. If you read, you know, James were the wacky Buddhist vegetarians, but it was so clearly misunderstood. It was so clearly going to be ridiculed. We just realized it was counterproductive, but we were talking about it. We, at the time when James, you know, we were meditating a lot, particularly me, Saul, me and Jimmy, and we had the original guitar player, Saul, Paul, who we wanted to get into meditation because he was getting into dope. And meditation, we felt it would give him an alternative high, and he was cracking up, and it didn't work for him. He ended up going in a psychiatric hospital. But it got us on the path of meditation. We were meditating 2 hours a day, 12 hours every weekend, for 3.5 years, celibate, no alcohol, no drugs. And the press got some of it. They just labelled us Buddhists, and the press picked on it, ridiculed it, and we felt after a while it was unfair on the other two in the band who weren't into it, and that we were just purely going to be misrepresented, and a load of people were going to be put off our music because of it. And so we started to go quiet on it. And it wasn't true, we weren't Buddhists. We were meditating, but we weren't Buddhists.
And when you spoke about the simple things you can do to change your life, is meditation what you mean?
I've done lots of things. I could talk to you in depth about meditation. I could talk to you in depth about dancing. Dancing's probably been the number one. I found at the age of 16 at this boarding school that I would lock myself in our study when no one was around, put on loud music and throw myself around the room. And it was like, it enabled me to express all the anger and the grief and the confusion of being in that horrific place. And it was just what I did. And I didn't know other people didn't do it. And I remember when we first had the first school dance with girls, age 16, I danced. And boys who were the cool boys would come up and they'd take the piss out of me, but it was with a kind of a respect. It was like, how do you do that? How do you do that? And girls were interested. And it was like this slightly strange person dancing in a rather unusual way that looked like nothing else. And it was like, huh. And I just kept on dancing. And finally, you know, I was dancing in a nightclub, very upset because my girlfriend had left me. And I was dancing quite violently. And these 16-year-olds saw me dancing and came up, and they were stealing my beer. And I sat down and I nearly got in a fight with them over the beer. And then they said, we love you dancing. We were in a band. Will you come and dance for our band? And I said, yeah. And a year later, we called ourselves James. And after about 6 months, he asked me to sing for the band, and then lyrics. And I'd never sung, and I'd never written lyrics. But I was at university, and they had this kind of ignorant appreciation of people at university must be intelligent, must be able to write lyrics.
You had cachet.
I had cachet. And so I wrote lyrics. And that's how I ended up in James, really.
And would you say is what you try and use James for?
To express ourselves. Every single song we've ever written has come from improvisation in a room. That's not true. There were a couple that in a different period where someone came in with a few chords. But normally it's 3 or 4 of us in a room with a drum machine, because a drum machine never tires, and it enables you to edit really to precision. And we just start jamming. Every single song is created through jamming, and we love it. We're like kids, and it's a joy because I work with amazing musicians who can play incredible stuff and always surprise me, even after 34 years. And that's probably the most enjoyable part of James, is the jam may last 10 minutes or it may last an hour and 20, and we are just following. It's like a dance between 4 people, and the song will just take off, and we record it in quality, and then we go back and listen to it, and now we chop up. I go, well, different people do it, but the way I work is I'll chop up the bits I love and see if I can put them together like a jigsaw, and then go, okay, this could be a song if we move this to this, and then we might play it, see if we can learn it and play it, or we might use the chop up and construct a song almost from that first jam. And we love the clashes, we love the mistakes. The mistakes are something that no songwriter could ever choose to do. So they transcend songwriting. They come from the unconscious. They come from a collective unconscious. The lyrics, I'm improvising words, I'm improvising sounds. I often come up with lyrics, quite a lot of the lyric in the first jam, that then tell me what the song is going to be about. And then I have to tune in and complete it, which can sometimes be tricky. As a process, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute joy. It's a surprise. No one controls it. I can't make a song to order. No one can. I can't write a lyric to order. I can't say I'm now going to write about Donald Trump. But if I'm pissed off about Donald Trump enough, he will come into the lyrics, because the unconscious will just start to let him in. I sometimes write about things that I know I'm writing about that have been so strong. So when my mother died, a lot of the album Le Petit Mort is about my mother dying and about my best friend dying a few months later. But it came out in ways that were unexpected, because my mother died beautifully, and so those songs about her are really up and optimistic, because it was a birth, obviously a birth, didn't need to be told, and she died in my arms, and she was 19, she was ready to go. So you let certain things in your life are so impactful, they just come into the songs. Other things you write are lyrically, and I haven't a clue what I've written. So, for example, I wrote this song, "This is you, this is me, underneath the Manzanita tree, fire consumes the fruit to seed. We are forged, we are baked, by this fire we are shaped, fire loved, fire wild. We must learn from our mistakes, all stars will fall underneath the Manzanita tree." And I thought, oh, what a crap lyric. No one in England's going to know what a Manzanita tree is. I'm writing about fire again, and I've written about fire a lot. What a cliche. I've got to try and change this lyric. And I couldn't change the lyric. Manzanita tree in Topanga, where I live, it's a tree that only seeds when a fire comes through and it germinates the seed. So for 40 years there's no manzanita trees, and then the whole place burns down, and then there's manzanita seeds. So it's a fascinating tree.
It's like a failsafe.
It's a failsafe, but it also tells you you're probably living in a rather dangerous area. Now, I wrote that lyric, not having a clue what I'd written, tried to change it, and okay, here's the other confession, which I don't always tell people. I feel I'm writing with help, and they often have a much better idea about what the lyrics meant to be than I do. The lyrics often come true a year later, about me or about close friends. They often come true not directly, but very close. So I wrote that lyric on the last album, thought it was a crap lyric, went up to Berkeley, moved back to Topanga to the flower ceremony. And there's a Manzanita tree at the flower ceremony, and they've invited us to hang on the Manzanita tree the different names of the people we've lost and loved. And I'm sitting there watching this fire going, oh, this is what that lyric's about. By this fire we are forged, we are baked, for stars will fall underneath the Manzanita tree. And so suddenly I go, oh, I'm in the right place. I'm meant to be back. My son is meant to be at this school. I wrote this lyric a year ago. I wrote a song called Move Down South on that record. And I'm going, why am I writing Move Down South when I'm moving up north? And when we mixed the song, we were in Berkeley up north, and my son listens to it and he goes, Dad, you're not listening to your own lyrics. You know they come true. We're meant to move down south. We're meant to move back to Topanga. On that record, there's a song called The Girl at the End of the World. It was a song about dying in a car crash. Going on the way up here, hairpin bends, idiot Americans overtake, someone goes down the canyon. You see it every month. And I wrote this song about, can you face death with joy? So the chorus is really uplifting. It's, remind me to breathe at the end of the world, appreciate scenes and the love I've received, to love who I've been at the end of the world, the departing, remind me to breathe at the end of the world. Positive song, but about dying in a car crash. And I got scared. And because of my history, I've been writing about that my lyrics come true for 30 years. And we're leaving Topanga. I think, okay, I can release this. We're leaving Topanga. We move up to Berkeley. I'm fine. We move back to Topanga. And I'm scared. And I tell my wife, and I tell my son, and I tell all my friends. I even tell interviewers that I'm scared about this song, because I've written a lyric about dying in a car crash and I know what happens. We record the song, we mix it. Jimmy in our band comes around a corner at 70 and there's a car overtaking 4 cars coming head on towards him, exactly as I describe it in the song. Overtaking SUV approaching, we're on a blind curve, there's nowhere to swerve. And just at the last minute, the 4 cars make space for him and they pull in, and he by a second he escapes death, and he pulls over shaking. And I think, oh, it's okay, he's broken the curse, no one's going to get hurt. That's what I was writing about. We decide to release the song as a single, which is never a good thing. And 2 weeks before it comes out as a single, I'm with my wife and my son on the freeway at 60, and someone slams into us from behind and the side on rush hour traffic at 60 miles an hour, packed. And somehow we go across 3 lanes of traffic without touching a car into the hard shoulder, and everything goes slow motion. And I turn around to my son, I go, "Are you okay?" He goes, "I'm fine, Dad." And I look in the mirror and I can see this guy's hitter spinning to face the traffic coming towards him at 60, 70 miles an hour. And they stop above him like a towering wave. No one is hurt. Wow. And we all pull to the side. And a week later, I hit a post. And a week after that, my wife gets hit behind at 5 miles an hour. And then the song's released.
Is that going to affect your future songwriting?
I won't write about dying in a car crash again. But I can't censor the songs because it feels like I betray something in myself and in my job. And my job is to write as honestly as I can, because I know it will find resonance with people and help their lives.
And when you say help with your songwriting?
Yeah. I get hundreds of letters from people describing in very precise detail how a song has changed their life and what a song means to them and how on earth did I know.
And do you have any sense of when you're writing a song, recording a song, playing a song live, of an emotion that you would like to place into the listener, a way you'd like them to feel or react?
A little. There's some craft. After the initial downloading, there's an element of craft. There's an element of how do you tell this story in the most effective way? And I'm a storyteller. And so, yes, there's some craft.
Because we were talking about education earlier, and for me, parenthood and how to be a good parent, and the balance between being a parent and being your own person, and where that comes in. So I'm wondering, what how do you walk that line in terms of balance? What have you learned in terms of, being true to yourself, but also being the best parent you can be?
Well, it's a great question, because being the greatest parent you can be also involves being the most fulfilled you can be. And that sometimes involves being quite radical. And it sometimes involves walking away to go and learn things on the other side of the world, or to go and teach things on the other side of the world. I think it's up to the individual to take it step by step. We have an amazing child. My older child is 27, so he's okay. Although he would say that he missed me. When my next child was born, I didn't tour for 2 years, so I could be around. I've taken him on tour a lot with me. We have the most incredible relationship. My wife tours a lot and travels a lot because she teaches. She's a shaman. She teaches shamanism, and she teaches going into altered states through dancing, as I do sometimes. And so we have to balance being away, but there's always one of us with him. And that's been amazing for me, because most fathers don't get that experience of being alone with their child for 3 weeks at the age of 2, and frequently. And so he's used to having one adoring parent with him the whole time. And it's been the most brilliant thing for me to learn and to be with my best friend, really, and to have to learn how to be in the world in that way.
And when you're on the freeway into Los Angeles and you're surrounded by all these people who seem to be incredibly time poor, by the way, there's traffic all the time. Traffic isn't as bad as I expected here, by the way, but there's always people going somewhere and everyone seems to be under such pressure, and the time pressure, the financial pressure are all kind of wrapped in together, and you're living close to them but in a different world metaphysically. What do you wish you could convey to them? Or I'm not trying to put you in a position where you sound like you know something that they don't, but what do you wish you could share with people to help make their lives easier - better?
I can't, and I don't have that arrogance. I live my life. I'm lucky enough to live just about in a national park. If we walk up the road, we're in a national park. I go into Los Angeles once a week, so I only dip into that world. We had a mountain lion in this area for 3 months, killed all our friends' goats, killed all the cats. We used to have a bobcat living under our house. Every year we see and nearly walk on rattlesnakes. We live in nature. We're blessed to live in nature. And it's amazing. So that's my reality. I live amongst some very interesting, creative people. And, you know, I cycle around here. And then I go into Los Angeles once a week. And I keep out of rush hour. And I dip in and get what I need and get out. Or go to the beach. And we do surfing, you know. My son's learning surfing. And my son's doing his black belt in karate next week. And, you know, you use what you can use and you get out. I don't know. You can see that that's more and more an option for more and more people, but I'm aware that I'm incredibly privileged to be able to do that. I go into Los Angeles to teach movement work. My wife teaches it, and when she's away I teach it. And we have classes of up to 70, 80 people in Los Angeles with a system of movement that would have been laughed at 30 years ago in the same way yoga's laughed at. And people come in and they dance and they cry and they shout and they scream and they vent and they love and they go out feeling that they've let off some steam. I mean, these are the things we do in our lives to make life livable, to let off steam, to function as a human being. We meditate, we dance, we go out for hiking in nature, you know, and we love our friends and our children. And it's simple, really. And then every so often I step on an airplane, I deal with jet lag, I go into a high intensity work situation where I have to be an athlete and you have to be in front of thousands of people in quite a vulnerable way. And it's a very exciting roller coaster. And then you come back and you come back to the quietness, to the contrast. I might come back to being a single father. And it's all part of being a human.
Tim, I can't think of a better place to wrap up, and we're only wrapping up because you have to go. But
I'm so glad we got that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Amazing. It's been a real pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for making the time in your incredibly busy schedule for Born Optimistic, and thank you to Tim's wife, Kate, for welcoming me into their home. Thanks to Meredith Plant, who works with Tim's management, for setting up the interview, and my friend Angela Smith, who hooked it all up and told me Tim lived in LA in the first place. Roddy and all at Art 19. I need to thank Barry McDonough from There 360, Randy Verges for the graphics, Zoe and all my friends, and also from RT, Louise Toll, Eric Trelfall, Martina McGlynn. Thank you all so much. next week's show. Amazing, incredible Wallace Bird. Until next week, this has been Born Optimistic.